Hi, everyone. My name is Jaleh. I am the co-founder and CEO of Mutiny. We were in the winter 2018, or actually the summer 2018 batch, so a little bit over 2 years ago. And prior to, so Mutiny, we help companies personalize their website for each visitor. And prior to Mutiny, I led marketing at Gusto. So I was there from the early days when we were all cramped into a little hot loft in San Francisco, and then I left when it was around 500 employees to start Mutiny. Gusto, as some of you might be familiar, SaaS product. So from a customer acquisition standpoint, we have very low deal sizes for B2B. And so it's all about building an inbound engine where we're driving a lot of people to the site and then converting them as efficiently as we can, mostly using online and technology as opposed to salespeople. And then prior to Gusto, I was at VMware, which is literally the exact opposite type of B2B engine. So really large deal sizes, $1 million type deals. And we worked really closely with the sales team to help identify enterprises that could buy from us and to convert those. So I should be able to answer most questions and challenges related to any kind of B2B engine. And what when I first started doing this talk, Gustav asked me, he said, come and teach people some stuff about marketing. And I was like, well, when I was in the batch, I cared the most about hitting my demo day goals. So getting leads for demo day. And he's like, oh, sure, great. Throw some stuff in there that's tactical that people can use. And then every time I've given this talk, I have shrunk the part that's about marketing in general and spend more and more time on how to be successful from a marketing standpoint while you're in YC. And today, what I'm going to do is shift almost 100% towards things that are relevant for you while you are in YC. The slides include all of the content, and I'm sure the team will share the slides with you afterwards. So if you want to gain broader exposure to marketing, you can go ahead and take a look at those slides. But I'd rather spend our time on things that are going to help you be really successful with demo day and fundraising, as opposed to things that you honestly don't have to think about for at least another year. So I'll cover some of the key concepts, but the ones that I think are going to be relevant for you. So the main goal for today is I want to help you get twice as many leads for demo day than you would have if you were to not attend this presentation. So hopefully, we'll accomplish that goal. We're going to start with some concepts that I think are really important for you to be good at selling and customer acquisition in general while you're in YC. And then we'll get super tactical on how do you build lists of enterprises while you're in YC? How do you reach out to those people so that you can basically take that playbook and start applying it tomorrow with actual names of vendors and places you can buy data and things like that. So we'll start with three concepts that I think are really important to be good at selling and customer acquisition during YC and forever, basically. So the first one is you have to understand your customers. And I know everybody talks about that, but I mean something really specific when I say that. And what I mean by understanding your customers is you have to know who are the stakeholders, what's important to them, what motivates them, how they buy similar software, and what that process looks like for them. And what I recommend for kind of the fastest way to gain that knowledge, because a lot of you, some of you are coming from industries that you've been in, but a lot of you are disrupting new industries that you don't come from, and that's your advantage. But regardless of how familiar you are, you have to get really familiar with the customers to be able to sell successfully. And so what I recommend is, as a starting point, is pick 3 groups that you think are going to be good buyers for your product. If you have a lot of confusion around what type of company you should be talking to, you can pick the groups based on the company stage. So you could say, I have no idea if we're going to sell to startups or mid-market or enterprise. Then those are your 3 groups that you should start by interviewing first. You might have some unique technology that has really different applications based on industry, and you're not quite sure where you can move the needle the most from a sales standpoint. So pick your groups based on that. For a lot of you, you probably have a sense of broadly, what types of companies could buy from you. So you might have more confusion around stakeholders, like who's the right buyer for my product. So you could pick your 3 groups based on stakeholders from, the relatively homogeneous pool of companies. But that typically ends up being a good starting point. And, if you pick companies, you can mix up the stakeholders a little bit so that you start to hear from different people. And I recommend doing 5 interviews with each of those groups. So it ends up being 15, 30-minute conversations, should take you no more than a week to complete. And I have in the slides here a recommendation for what to ask people when you do those interviews. All of these questions are really about understanding the motivation, the alternatives. The questions are purposely open-ended. So for example, we don't ask people, what are your metrics? If we want to know what they consider success, because if we ask, like, for example, if I ask a B2B enterprise marketer, what are your metrics? They'll say leads, but really what they care about is making sales happy, for example. So you want to ask, like, what do people expect of you here? Can you tell me, a quarter where you had like a really good quarter, and tell me like what was involved? Or how do you know you're doing a good job here? That's when you start to hear real motivations. And that stuff is important when later on you're talking to people and trying to sell them stuff. For understanding the buying process, I usually recommend, there's a question in here on, let's say you're selling a DevOps product. I would say, ask them, can you tell me the last DevOps product that you bought, and walk through how they bought that? Who was involved? Oh, Joe. What does Joe do? Oh, how come Larry had to sign it? Oh, because the deal's over 50K. Okay, cool. So you start to get a lot more detailed information when you have somebody walk through a case study of how they bought, versus if you ask them who would have to sign off. You'll get 10% of the information that you actually need versus a case study. So these questions are here. Feel free to change them, but if you have no idea where to start, I think like if you literally ask these exact questions, you should be able to walk away with a really good understanding of your different customers. So normally what I would do at the end of this exercise is I would rewrite your pitch once you have done this. So now that you understand, you probably want to refactor the types of people you're reaching out to based on this. You may want to, if you saw that certain things were really important to people, you probably had some wrong assumptions around that. So just recraft your sales pitch and also the people that you're targeting after this. The value of it is that it will, even if you know your customer. So for example, I sold like Mutiny, we sell that to B2B marketers, right? I know a lot about B2B marketers. I still did 100 customer discovery conversations before we started. And the value is you start with a much better pitch, from which point you can iterate. And then also beyond that starting point, your learning curve is a lot faster because you now have all this context and the dots start to connect for you a lot faster. So this would be my first piece of advice. Do this next week if you haven't done this already. And to get 15 interviews, you probably can reach out to 100 people on LinkedIn. That should be enough. So spend half a day going on LinkedIn, putting in different companies. One of the things we'll talk about in a minute here is LinkedIn Navigator. I'd recommend buying that. It's like about $70 a month. And it just gives you really good ability to search for companies. And so you just buy that, go into that. They'll show you all the parameters, company size, industry. You can put in titles, and then it'll spit out a list for you. And then just start, connecting with people with a really short blurb about why you're connecting with them. Once they accept your invite, then give them a little bit more context and ask for the interview conversation. If you do that 100 times, should take you about 6 hours, you'll get 15 conversations for sure at the other end, hopefully. If you don't, then your pitch there might be something really off about the pitch that is not going well. Okay, the second concept that I want to talk about, which I usually get a lot of questions around this, is messaging. Like, how do you pitch your product? I think the most important thing is to say what you do clearly and to make sure you solve an actual problem for people. These are probably the two most common messaging mistakes that founders make. Michael Siebel had this really good expression that I use still today, which is 80% accurate, 100% clear. So Mutiny, we are building a growth as a service platform that has all these like bells and whistles. We have this big long-term vision. If I say that when I'm reaching out to customers, they'll just delete the email that I send them because they don't understand what I'm talking about. So when I talk to customers, I just say, we help personalize your website for every visitor. They immediately understand what I do, which is the first step to caring about anything else. So once we've landed that and they understand what I'm talking about, then I'll add in maybe one line about our top differentiator. And you can do this without any engineering, or it's free, or we create your first 5 tests for you for free, or something like that, right? Just the thing that, once they understand, then they might be like, well, I've heard this before. Why should I do something this time? And so, usually a really good pitch is super short, clear, and then it includes one differentiator after the person understands what you're talking about. On the actual problem side, a lot of times, you might, if you pitch somebody what you do for 30 minutes and they still aren't that excited, that's probably not the person that's going to buy something from you. And I think this is particularly important for demo day, where as you're talking to different groups of people, you need to pay attention to where am I getting traction and where does there seem to be a lot of interest, and abandon the groups that don't experience enough pain to buy your product. A lot of times I've noticed that, especially founders that don't have sales or marketing backgrounds, they'll be like, maybe I'm just explaining it wrong. And sure, you'll get a lot better at pitching your product, but there's definitely, in the early days, it's not everyone's cup of tea. They have to experience extreme pain around what you're solving for the risk reward to make sense, right? Because the risk reward of a new product is really bad, right? You have a lot to gain if they buy your product, and you have almost no risk. The buyer has much less to gain, and they have a bunch of risks because the product is new, they've never heard of it. You're probably not doing a great job of explaining all of it. You haven't built all of it. So you do have to find people that have a lot of pain. So to give you an example, at Mutiny, marketing operations is part of every sale that we do. But when I start selling personalization to a marketing operations person, I don't solve a meaningful enough problem for them. If anything, what they care about is having fewer systems. And so when I go to them, I can pitch, till the cows come home, on how we're better than Adobe, which is the existing tool that they use, and how we're easier to use. But at the end of the day, they're still going to be like, this sounds great, but like, I'm risk averse and I don't want more infrastructure. So that's not a great person for us to start with. On the other hand, a revenue person, someone who owns a lead number, who's every week being measured on revenue and leads, is a great person for me to talk to, because when I talk to them, they're like, yeah, I know we have Adobe, but we can't use it to get leads. I'm not getting the impact that I need. So I care a lot about getting a new technology that can help me accomplish my goal. So try to pay attention to, clarify your messaging, that's good, but also realize that there are going to be a lot of groups that you should quickly run away from because they're not going to end up buying your product. Does that make sense? And feel free to jot down your questions. When we do Q&A at the end, we can address like anything that came up for you guys. The third and final concept that I think is important during YC when you're selling is make the decision easy for them. A lot of times you'll hear the jargon for this is orchestrate customer journey. But really what it means is when someone's trying to buy something from you, there's going to be risk alongside just throughout that decision process. And your goal is to make it easy for them. So for example, I would, during YC, my co-founder was building the product I was selling, and I was terrible at it, like the things I would blurt out in these sales. So you'll get a lot better at it too. But essentially at the end of the day, I would be like, okay, it seems like I continuously run into this problem where people don't know how to be creative and how to write the content for personalization. And I feel like I'm getting a lot of drop off because of that. And so then I'd be like, okay, the next day what I'm going to do to make that easy is I'm going to tell everybody that I'll write their first 3 tests for them. Or if I feel like they don't believe that we can have an impact, I might say, you get a 30% lift or it's free. Like, so I might come up with a guarantee to make that easier for them. At Gusto, we had this problem where a lot of people were switching payroll providers. And even though that process was totally fine, there was this perceived risk around switching. And whether it would take a long time or their data might get lost when they're moving from one payroll provider to another. So we just said, we will move your data for you. Just give us your login to ADP or whatever you use. We'll sign an NDA or something that protects you, and then we'll just move all of that data for you. And these types of things where you essentially identify pockets of risk that makes a buyer go, maybe I'll just not respond to this person anymore. That's when you lose them. Try to get ahead of those and constantly iterate your pitch to resolve those points of risk for the customer. Okay, those are my 3 big things around just the concept of selling, because that's essentially, you're not really doing a ton of marketing when you're in YC. You're selling. And so I think this stuff becomes really important to be successful. And then at a high level for B2B, this is the only kind of scalable thing that we'll talk about. There tends to be 3 B2B engines within just marketing, and they are derived from your business model. So the 3 are freemium, self-serve, and enterprise. And as your company gets bigger, you might have a couple of these happening at the same time. But freemium, which is pretty rare for YC, especially if you're doing B2B, I've rarely seen that, but might be an open source product, might be something you offer for free. The goal of your customer acquisition engine is to identify the needle in the haystack. So you're going to have a lot of visitors and only about 3 to 5% will convert. So your goal is to augment a lot of data to everybody that signs up, or as much data as you can, and then be able to identify the ones that, based on their firmographic, demographic, and product usage, are going to be the best candidates for upsell, and then you upsell them. So that's the freemium engine. The self-service engine is Gusto is the perfect example. Stripe, another great example in the early days. These are both inbound engines. They don't make a ton of money off of each customer, but they have a lot of customers. And that's how the math works out to still build a big company. In a self-serve kind of inbound model, what the goal of the marketing team is to, through things like content marketing, advertising, maybe big partnerships, to generate a lot of top of funnel. So you want a lot of people coming to the website. It'll always be less than the freemium people, but then you convert about 20 to 30% of those people. And so conversion rates are higher relative to freemium. And so the size of the top is smaller, but relative to the enterprise B2B engine, they still have a lot of people coming into their funnel. And so you have to generate a lot of traffic when you build that engine, and you have to get really good at converting that traffic online when they're coming to your site. So those tend to be the levers that you have to be good at from a marketing standpoint. Enterprise, as you might have guessed, it's usually 30K plus annual deals. And essentially the name of the game is like, how fast can you hire salespeople to close those deals? The marketing team is spending a lot of time building good lists for the sales team. Essentially you tend to have a known universe of people that you want to acquire. And then you're closing people from those accounts. And so these are the three engines that exist in steady state when you're a larger company. When you're in YC, you don't really do any of those. When you're in YC, because the product is really limited, you're essentially doing enterprise. The closest thing you're doing is enterprise marketing of the three that I talked about. ABM is account-based marketing, which is basically the marketing strategy for enterprise. And essentially all you're doing is you're creating cold and warm prospect lists, and then you're selling to them. This is the only thing I would recommend you do. Don't go writing a bunch of content to build an SEO engine. Don't do advertising. Partnerships are really difficult usually unless one falls into your lap. But 95% of you should be acquiring every customer in this way. So even Gusto, right? When we were in YC, we didn't have any of like the inbound engine aspects. We manually acquired the first 20 customers that we had. So even though they were small, nobody cared about costs of customer acquisition. We were just trying to get users to buy our product and validate it. And so scalability doesn't matter. You can throw whatever you have at the process. Nobody is going to ask you about cost of acquisition and making sure that you have scalable engines. When you're doing your fundraising, there are a few exceptions. Like if you're selling a $10 B2B product, for example, there was somebody in our batch, they were selling phone systems to mom and pops. And so for them, they did need to show some fundamental good economics. But for everybody else, you have a revenue number and just hit that number in whatever way you can. Does that make sense? This is partially also why I strip away. Over time, I've stripped more and more of the general marketing concepts because I genuinely don't think they apply while you're in YC. So the better you get at selling manually with blood, sweat, and tears, the better, the more likely you are to hit your demo day goal. So let's talk about how to do that. Okay, so the first step is building a list. There are a few good potential ways to get lists, and some of them are going to have really limited volume, but they're going to be more likely to convert. But we'll also talk about how to get lists that have much higher volume in case like you have a limited network and things like that. So the first step is go through your own network. I think people really underestimate this, especially I would say younger founders who are new to an industry. There are a lot of ways in which you can have a network. It could be the school you went to, did you work somewhere before this? All of those are, do your parents know people, right? Like most of our first customers at Mutiny came from our network. So those people are always going to be a lot more likely to buy from you. You might have friends that work at a company. That's another way that you can build a network. So your friend might work at, Stripe, and you want to sell something to their head of sales ops. Even if your friend is an engineer, you can ask them for an intro to their head of sales ops. So try to have a broader perspective on network. And I'll show you how to find common connections in a minute on LinkedIn so at least take a look at it. Most people, I think, skip network if they assume they don't have one. And so, they don't even know that, maybe they had 150 people that they could have possibly asked for introductions from. That's always going to be your best bet. This is where I would spend your time first. The second group is YC companies. This one's a little tricky because now that I'm a YC company, I get pinged a lot. And so, but when I was in YC, we definitely hit a lot of YC companies and we got YC companies to buy our product. So I think, you know, the key thing when you're reaching out to YC companies is be personalized. The email does really need to be written. I don't think you can even do mass personalization. I think you have to like think very specifically about who you're reaching out to, why you can help them. If it looks like a cold email, they're not going to read it. But, you know, founders at the domain, that's the email address for every YC company. And if you don't want to use founders at, their first name at their company is almost always the email address of the founders. So building the list is really easy. YC on Bookface has a list of YC companies. So that's how you can find them. What we did was we downloaded the list and then we used Clearbit API. It's just an email enrichment tool. We enriched their domain. So we, you know, they would tell us that way we could quickly get how big is their company, and like what industry are they in, et cetera. So it just bypassed a lot of research for us. And the product is clear. You go to clearbit.com and you'll be able to get that email enrichment. And then from there, you know, I looked at like the few thousand, you know, at this point it's probably like 5,000 people. And from there, I just knocked out anybody that was too small or too big or whatever, and then had a much shorter list that I then reached out to with a personalized message. So that's another way that you can reach out to potential buyers. The third, which is the biggest group, this you can do all day long, is finding people at companies that are a great fit for you. And we'll talk about how to do that. There's a lot of data providers out there, and you basically buy lists of people that fit a certain criteria. And you know, we still acquire customers at Mutiny that way. But this list will be, you know, will be bottomless. And then, you know, this is going to be a little bit harder during you know, shelter in place, but because there's just not a lot of stuff that you can drop in on. But, you know, being scrappy is helpful. I think we'll go through the process of how to build lists and how to email a lot of people so that you always have, so you should never be short of sales conversations. That's kind of what I want to make sure happens for you. But a lot of your customers, just keep in mind, are going to come from, you know, random connections, et cetera. So be scrappy, and I want you to have the list generation as just a steady thing that you're doing that's giving you confidence, that's allowing you to have a lot of conversations, so that you never feel helpless. But keep in mind that, as you know, based on what progress you're having and how many deals you're closing, you should be every week thinking, what are creative ways that we can get in front of an account and bring a customer, et cetera. So don't over rely on that engine and shut off to the creativity. And then finally, like, don't do anything scalable. You know, if you want to write content because there's a piece of content that you think will help people reply to you, you have something interesting to say, you know, that's fine. That's not really a content engine though. That's just, you're just working on a different email or message to send to somebody. But if you want to create a guide or something like that, that's fine. But, you know, we're talking about like SEO engines, blogs, stuff like that, where you're relying on them to bring you traffic. That's not going to happen, I would say, unless you're really far along. And I don't know, the YC composition has changed a little bit. So I know some of the companies coming in might be a little bit older, but I'm assuming the average makeup of someone who is like pre-product market fit. Typically you want to stay away from any scalable acquisition. Those things you do once you have product market fit and a lot of confidence in your messaging and things like that. Okay, so let's take a look at the numbers for this method. So let's say your goal by demo day is to get $100,000 in revenue, and your average deal size is $10,000. This was our goal. So you need 10 customers in 10 weeks, basically, to get there, right? So these are pretty generous conversion numbers for a funnel, just to kind of give you a sense of how many people you need to reach out to. So, you know, people that I contact, maybe 10% of them will respond. That's pretty generous, to be honest. It could be as low as like 3%. And then of the people that respond, discovery is that first conversation where, I try to understand, do they have a need? Does this make sense? Is this the right buyer, et cetera? So I do some basic qualification and get them excited. And then, they become qualified, and then they do a trial, and then they become a customer. So by the time you multiply those things out, you need to reach out to 400 people a week to hit this demo day goal based on these numbers. So how do you reach out to 400 people a week? That you can't do that manually, right? Like that's kind of the point that I want to make, is like you need a little bit of systems to be able to do this effectively. But it's totally possible and not that hard. So let's talk about how to do that. Okay, so the first thing I would get is LinkedIn Sales Navigator. We talked about that already. The second thing is you should buy leads. So this is based on your criteria. The tool that I recommend is Apollo, because it's data and also an email platform. So it's really easy for prospecting. And essentially when you go into Apollo, you'll be able to, I don't have a screenshot of the UI, but you'll put in criteria. So you'll say, I want the company to have this many employees. I want the seniority of the titles to be this, So you essentially identify the type of company that you want, and then you start to guess at some titles and contacts within those companies. And so you'll build a list, let's say you pick 4 contacts, maybe 2 to 4 is probably pretty good per company. Every week you might have 100 companies that you're identifying and about 4 contacts within those companies. And I think for Apollo, it's like 10 cents a lead or something like that. I don't know what their pricing is, but I think it's okay to spend like a few grand on customer acquisition when you're in YC. Don't be so cheap that you're literally, the only thing you're using is your own body and mind. Like it's okay to spend a little bit of money on tools and leads. It's, it'll just be a couple of $1,000s, will give you a ton of leverage when you're in YC. And so use Apollo, buy the contacts from there, and now you have a list of people that you can reach out to. And Apollo also has an email tool, so you can actually schedule like, okay, I want like a 3-part email, day 1, 3 days later, 4 days later. So, it's the easiest solution, I think. Especially if you're new to marketing, that's what I would recommend. We actually still use Apollo at Mutiny because it's still pretty efficient. There's other data providers that I put in here. You might, a lot of people scrape. So if you have some obscure buyer where it's hard to buy lists of them, you may want to just spend a little bit of time figuring out how to scrape databases, or a lot of times people that are targeting recruiting software, they'll have to do scraping because they need to know how many open positions does a company have. So they'll build a little scraper to go and like figure out, okay, let me look at your jobs page and see what you have. So if buying contacts doesn't work for you, you can do scraping. Or if you just have a source where you're like, oh, everyone that has this integration is a really good fit, that could be another reason why you would kind of build your own list and scrape. The alternative to scraping is Upwork, and you can also augment scraping with Upwork. Which is another thing that I really recommend you use for enterprise. Upwork is just a contract network, and any contractor with 4.5 to 5 stars who mentions on their profile they use LinkedIn, last I checked, it's like $5 an hour. Those are pretty good. It's okay if you don't have a contractor in mind. That's generally a pretty good rating. And you ask them, someone explained it to me as like almost like human API, which is not a very nice term, but it does really describe how to think about the Upwork contractors. So what you want to do is write perfect instructions for what you want them to do. So for example, for us, we like to know how many sales reps a company has. So when we build our lists in Apollo, I also want to know how many sales reps do they have? And on their website, when I click on solutions, are there like a bunch of solutions that they list, or are they still selling one product? So those are 2 things that I really want to know that's important for Mutiny. we have our Upwork contractor do that. So we have done it ourselves manually 10 times. And based on that, we've written really clear instructions of step 1, put in the URL. Step 2, click on solutions or products. Step 3, write this down in this row of this Google sheet that I have next to the company name. So you have to be incredibly detailed. And then you hand the list off to the Upwork contractor. For your first 20 or so, you want to give them a lot of feedback because you're going to make a lot of mistakes. And then after that, you have a pretty good system going, right? You know how to buy leads. You know how to add additional information to those leads. And usually with Upwork, it ends up costing about $1 per lead when you do the math. If you have good instructions and you're not, you're asking for like a reasonable amount. They can usually do like 5 to 6 leads an hour for you. So still not that expensive, right? It's like $400 a week. So so that's how to buy lists. Does everyone understand how to build a list? Okay. So if you didn't go like this, ask me what exactly you didn't understand so I can clarify that for you. Because I do want, like, it should be pretty straightforward to know how to build a list. So if I wasn't clear about something, let me know. And then once you have your list and you're sending these emails, you want to have a CRM just so that you can stay organized. A lot of founders, they would just like randomly make calls and have sales conversations and write things down on pen and paper. And you can't do that when you're reaching out to 400 contacts a week. So what I recommend is keep everything within Apollo when you're sending out those emails. When somebody raises their hand and says, I'm interested in talking to you, that's when they enter your sales funnel, then put them into your CRM. And so there are very few people every week that you're putting into your CRM. You're not putting 400 people into your CRM, right? Just the hand raisers. And so what I recommend Google Sheets or Airtable. I used what's now called Zendesk. You can use HubSpot. It doesn't matter, whatever's comfortable for you. Just have a way to track people in stages of funnels. Like that's basically all that you're trying to do. So you can manually write their names on spreadsheets and put a stage for them. You can build a pretty simple one for free in Airtable. Just stay organized with that. And then one other tool that I'll mention as an alternative to Apollo is Persist. Persist is free. It's really easy for mass emailing of this type that we're talking about. But the difference between Persist and Apollo is Persist doesn't have data. So it's just the email tool, and it's actually really nice and easy to use. And so if you scrape a list, things like that, I would probably recommend using Persist instead of Apollo. Does that make sense? Okay, cool. So now we have everything that we need. We know how to get lists, and we have we have a system to email them with, and we have a place to track our sales funnel. So now best practices for cold outreach is essentially, and it looks like I only have 20 minutes left, so I'll go a little bit faster here. I recommend starting with a segment and building references. So it's just really helpful if you can say to somebody from financial services that you have other companies like them, or if you're reaching out to high growth companies, if you're selling to Gusto, it would be helpful if Stripe was using it. So it's just gives you a little bit more leverage to go segment by segment than to just, randomly email everybody. And that progress will come throughout YC. So in the beginning, you might have nothing, but then in week 3, week 4, it's all about like, how do we set you up for success faster as the weeks progress? Create the list of companies where you talked about this. So set your company criteria and then find the contacts using automation, which we talked about already. Tailoring your note, I think, is really important for cold outreach, especially because people get emailed a lot and things like that. And so what we would do and what I would recommend is, it's hard to write a personalized note for every single contact if you're doing 400. So what we would do is segment-based personalization. So essentially we would download the list from Apollo, put it into Google Sheets, and then we would say, for people that are from this industry, we'll change the customers that we have, we'll mention these things. And so then in your Google Sheet, you just write a formula. If industry is this, insert these words, right? So you just have these little blurbs that you want to enter into your email. Or we would say, put in the number of sales reps, and that was a different value for every customer, right? And then what you do is you upload that spreadsheet back into Apollo or Persist. And these tools, all of them, let you track what's called a custom blurb. So you'll say, column X in my spreadsheet is the sales count variable. And so in your email, you would say, just very similar to how you would say, hi, first name, and it populates first name for you. It can populate sales total for you. So you would basically just, your email, instead of having a lot of hard-coded text, would have a bit more variables in it that is being populated from your spreadsheet. So that's a way where you think about your personalization strategy once, and then you're not constantly on a one-by-one basis creating personalization. And if you are, it's being done by the Upwork contractor, for example, where they're looking for the sales head count or things like that. And so now you have emails that should be converting at least at like 5%. Like you should be getting reply rates on those emails. The next thing is highlight your credibility. This is, I would say, the thing that I see YC founders do is they're like, I don't have any customers. I don't have any credibility, so I don't have anything to talk about. You got into YC, you have a hook, I promise. There's something about you that's compelling and interesting, even if you don't have customers. Maybe you are 4 PhD researchers from MIT. That's a hook, that's your credibility, right? And so just, there's no excuse for that, because remember, the make it easy for them. If I get a cold email and I have no idea why I should talk to you, like what makes this less risky of a decision to have this phone call with you, I'm probably not going to reply to you, right? So make sure that you have a hook. If you have really bad email conversion rates, your hook is probably not great, or the way you're describing what your company does is really unclear. Tune your CTA. Sometimes you might be asking for, hey, I want to sell you something. And if you seem to not get good conversion rates, play with your CTA. You might want to change it to, hey, I'm a founder, I'm trying to get product feedback. Would you be willing to have a conversation with me? At the end of that product feedback conversation, they understand what you do, what your product does, and they'll actually start to express interest in it if they like it. So that might be just a much easier way to get in front of the right people. So play around with your CTA. Sometimes people will, this is where you might use content. You might be like, hey, I found like this thing. Do you think this, what do you think of this? And then they'll reply, and then you can engage. It would be great if just your sales ask worked, because then it's just a faster funnel. But if it doesn't, you may need to tune that. And the product feedback one would be the next CTA that I would try. And then, add value in each touch point. If you're sending them a bunch of emails, usually you can't just send one email. You have to send at least a second one, because even if they're interested, they're busy. So I usually recommend like 3. That's a good number where it doesn't piss people off, but it makes sure that if they are interested, they'll get back to you. And in your last email, say like, this is my last, I don't want to bother you. So I won't send anymore. If you can tell me maybe 1, 2, 3, like which of these was the reason you didn't reply, that would be super helpful for feedback for me, or something like that. And then that way they might be like, oh no, I'm actually really interested. I've just been busy or been out of town, or they might reply to, which means like, I don't have this problem that you're trying to solve, or whatever. For intros, I just have a little, I have a little like GIF here so you can see how to do this. But basically, this is in a LinkedIn Navigator. You put in you put in what you're looking for, and then it'll show you here who that contact, and it'll tell you who the shared connections are. So you just click on that, you go to the shared connection, you grab their email, and you send them an email. So usually I recommend don't ask for intros on LinkedIn. A lot of people don't really respond to LinkedIn. So grab the shared contacts email and send them. And the main thing for an intro is your email template should be really easy to forward. So if you're asking for an intro to a person, hyperlink that person, add their LinkedIn profile. I don't want to have to be like, oh, who's Joe from blah, blah, blah. Like, I should just be able to click if I don't remember who that person is that you're asking me for an intro. And then the email that you send should be forwardable. So, you write a really short thing. Hey, like, I'd like to get an intro to blah, blah, blah. I've included this information that gives context on the intro for the person, so that I can literally, the only thing I have to do is, if I don't remember who Joe is, I click on the link. I'm like, oh yeah, I know this guy. And so then I will forward that to Joe. And then if Joe opts in, then I'll make the introduction. This is an example of an intro email that I used when I was in YC. This is for people at companies that I want to sell to. So like, this is I know the engineer, but I want to talk to the head of sales ops. This is like that template. That's why there's no name for the person, because I don't know exactly who that person is. This email would be stronger when I said, would you be able to intro me to your head of acquisition, is if I said, it looks like from a LinkedIn search, it's Kelly. And I hyperlinked Kelly's name. So it would be stronger if I'd done one more step of research and added in who might be the right person. Especially if the company's big, you will have to do that. Cool. And again, you'll get that in the email. I'm gonna, just in the interest of time, I'll just highlight maybe one of these, which is this notion that, you should do whatever it takes to close the deal. That would be my number one advice. And if you're running into problems repeatedly, be open about that and talk to other people. I think there's this, at least when I was in YC, there's this fear of like, oh, am I the shitty company? And, there's a lot of things that are not working when you're in YC. That's okay. Everyone has those problems. You're pre-product market fit. There should be all sorts of problems in your business. And the way to get better at it is by talking about it and asking for help, asking the partners for help. So don't be embarrassed, and just constantly identify actual problems that you're having, and then think about like, how can I, what's in my tool belt to throw at this problem. So with that, why don't we do some questions? I'll move this thing down here so I can see you guys better.
Maybe, Jaleh, if you want to stop sharing your screen too, and then you can see everybody in the gallery view. There are 240 folks on here. So maybe we could go off of reactions. Like if somebody has like up in the top left corner, do you want to call on people or?
Yeah, let me see. I can only see one screen at a time. So I guess.
Let's see, if you open the participants, if you click participants in there, you can open it and you can see folks with their hands raised. Should we try that? Otherwise, if you just want to open it up for folks to unmute themselves too.
Yeah, I would say, why don't you just unmute yourself, and then if we run into a problem, then we can solve for that. But
sounds good.
And looks like
Go ahead. I'll go straight for it. So I have a weird question. So when you had that slide up, which was like the 3 different versions of, let me see if I took a screenshot, self-service versus like premium, self-service, enterprise.
Yeah.
We have a thing which we sell B2B that we have like a version which we think of as self-service and a version which we think of as enterprise. And the thing that comes up often, like we say, we give you all these high touch things if you pay us over this amount. And a lot of the time, and like we think of like a certain level, 10K as being like the minimum number, and that being self-service. And we've run into, this is a question that anyone can weigh in on the chat too, but I think that perhaps like, is the message that our price point is just wrong if we are getting lots of inbound traffic, which would match up with self-service, but like people only want to pay 5K and we think the minimum's 10K, or we think that even at like 10K would just be self-service. I'm kind of curious if anyone has any thoughts.
What's the problem that you're facing?
Yeah, so like, how do I put this? So we think that companies should, it's not truly self-service, and so we don't want to take too little money for the thing that we do. We're actually a nonprofit, and we have like this really unique virtual volunteer opportunity that we like have a special version of the platform the volunteers use, and like essentially we'll run into cases where companies will really like us, but they're a smaller company, or they'll say like, oh, we only will pay 5K or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But like what they're asking us to do is actually something that feels more like enterprise, and that it's going to be high touch for us, but they're expecting us to only take 5K.
So you're worried that you're underpricing for the service that you're offering?
I guess I was just curious, like, I think, and we're getting a lot of inbound traffic too, so it feels kind of confusing between figuring out if we really should be pursuing a self-service model where we won't do these high touch things for under a certain amount, or if like, or if in the enterprise model, like because you said it's typically greater than 30K, and so, but then you also said on another side, like you should do whatever it takes, like.
Yeah, I would say that slide is in steady state post product market fit. So, you know, I would say if something on that slide is throwing you off, ignore that. Okay. I would, it sounds like you're trying to figure out, like, should we do, there's kind of two things that I heard in there. One is like, should we do, how do we balance like self-serve smaller versus enterprise in terms of where we're putting in effort? And then the other part of it is, are we doing too much for the small companies?
Yeah.
You know, I would say, when we were in YC, we literally wrote our first line of code on day one of YC, right? So we were very early, and we didn't have this problem of, you know, there was no part of our funnel or anything that was too big. So there was no cost question for us. Like, it was just a matter of like, what is the best way for me to use my time outside of that general efficiency question? It wasn't like, well, you know, we have many options and therefore we should, you know, do this versus that. And so, and I think most people are in that boat. So if you are spending a lot of time to close deals, and that's, you know, you're bottlenecked at how many deals you can close and not how much effort you're putting into it, I would keep doing that, even if it's not cost effective. But just know that if the economics don't make sense, you need to have a really good answer for how you're going to improve those economics post YC. And so, you know, sometimes like even in your fundraising questions and stuff, if people can kind of, if this is a common problem, you might get questions about it, which is, hey, like, you know, we've seen this fail before because the economics didn't work. So you may need to have that answer ready earlier, or maybe even have a couple of examples of how, you know, you don't do that. So for example, for us, the economics of what we did definitely didn't work during YC because we had to help people manually launch personalization tests. But we had a really good answer to why those economics were going to improve, because our answer was, once we generate successful experiences, we use machine learning to then recommend those personalizations automatically, which has zero cost for us. So right now we're working with a customer experience team. We're undercharging people because the product isn't like fully baked. But in a year from now, we'll be able to introduce freemium, you know, or whatever, because like our cost of support will actually be zero. So yeah, as long as you're not bottlenecked today. But if you were like, I'm the person that does sales and support, and I think I could sell a lot more if I spend less of my time supporting people, then I would pay attention to that and say, how much less can you do while making sure the customer is successful? The thing where you don't have a choice about is, can the customer be successful or not? They must all be successful. So that's the first thing you got to solve for. And then from there, how efficiently can we get there? Hope
That's
that
really
answers your
helpful.
question. Okay, great. Who else?
Question on targeting local businesses. So any advice on how to build a leads list for local businesses where the challenge is reaching to an actual decision maker? Like a lot of the times you're going to get sort of a generic email or a generic number, and actually getting to the person you can close a deal with.
So yeah, good question. Small businesses are always a little bit tougher. I think Yelp, I might, there's probably directories that do small businesses. So you can do some Googling and stuff and see if you can find find a targeted list that's already gone through Yelp and scraped and has the name of the business owner and things like that. And usually these things have ratings online, so you'll be able to see. And this is the same for SMB or any kind of specialized database that you need to build. If it doesn't exist, I would just have a Upwork contractor build your list off of Yelp probably, or Yellow Pages or something like that. But I bet someone has at least has scraped it. So there's a starting point. So you buy the list, it's a lot faster. And then you have your Upwork contractor further qualify that list by looking at certain criteria of like, hey, I want you to go to make sure they have a website, or I want you to go to their website and like find the owner's name or something like that. But
sorry to interrupt real quick, Tom, if you DM us, we can help you get one of those lists. And also one thing we found is if you use Facebook Messenger, you're usually talking to the decision maker. So we work with a lot of commercial real estate folks out there. So sorry to interrupt you, but we'd be happy to help if you send it.
I already did a demo and I'm actually reaching out to you guys on Monday.
Okay, perfect. So just want to make sure that the Facebook Messenger, I think, is a great way to kind of go right to the decision maker. So anyway, sorry to interrupt you.
No worries. And
Tyler, put your info in the group chat, please.
Squared. They're pretty awesome.
That's awesome. And also send it to me as well. I always want to know what good new lists are. For SMBs too, sometimes texting works a lot better than email. So just another thing to keep in mind. And there's a lot of like text platforms where you can, especially once you enter a deal cycle with them, texting might be a better CRM for you than email.
I have a quick question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We have a product we sell, and we were able to do quite a bit of sales in our first year, but we also have an upsell in our app for pro features, which is our monthly recurring.
Mm-hmm.
In creating lists, would you focus on the $20 first sale or the $3 a month sale?
What's your demo day goal?
Our demo day goal, we have a few. We're trying to scale up our revenue more. We're trying to hit 10,000 subs.
Yeah.
We've been growing well. We did over 7 figures in sales our first year, but we want to figure out how to get more on MRR and less on day-to-day sales, direct to consumer.
Yeah.
And we just wanted to see what you would prioritize. Would you focus more on?
I would prioritize what will be perceived as risky in your fundraising round. So, and by the way, if you're running the business well, things that people care about in fundraising should be similar to what you care about as the owner. So I don't necessarily mean this as like play to investors, more just like when you're, in these early stages, you're basically de-risking your business in different ways. And sometimes there might be a lot of common comfort in hey, like we actually don't have any concerns that you can generate top of funnel because we have precedent for that in the market. We have this company to look at, so I'm not concerned about that. Where we've seen people fail is in the upsell, and therefore, that's what you're going to get hammered on. So I would honestly just, have a couple of conversations with that all of the partners are also investors, and so they might be able to guide you. But I would pick it based on risk, and I would pick a primary goal and then a secondary goal. So if you identify that the biggest thing that you have a problem with is showing top of funnel, then I would focus your acquisition engine on that. But then in terms of upsell, maybe all you need to do is show it working on a small basis. So you can say, you know, we haven't focused on building out a whole upsell engine, but here's a test we did for 20 people and our conversion rate was 30%, and this is what they paid us. So you basically de-risk that piece in a much smaller way. And then that way your pitch is, look, we've totally figured out how to get top of funnel for 50 cents a user or whatever. And all of these things we're doing have so much more room for scale. And we have shown we've de-risked this upsell problem. Now, when we raise this money, one of the things we're going to do is like now also invest in the upsell. So definitely follow a de-risking model.
I love that.
Jaleh, really quick, I wanted to say it's 12:20 now. So technically the session should end, but if you want to take one more question to close us out, we have a few more minutes.
Yeah, that sounds good. I have until 12:30.
Okay, perfect.
Jaleh, I have a question. When you did your early calls, like the discovery calls, did you at all mention what you were working on, or how did you like overall like position stuff? Like, am I just trying to like learn more about you, or like, hey, this is what we're building, we're trying to learn more about you?
Yeah,
Also,
awesome. Hi, Roman. I know you. So the early calls, I think if you do them well, they can actually, a lot of them can become customers, and they did for us. It's the first step in a relationship. So essentially, this was something that I learned as almost like a byproduct of having done a lot of discovery. But I think you can actually do it as a strategy. You know, you would have the conversation, and in the conversation, I'm asking them open-ended question. The last 10 minutes of it, or the last like 5 minutes of it, then I talk about what we're building. And so I would say, you know, here's actually, you know, how we're tackling it. Thanks so much for answering these questions. This is what we're looking to do. And then I start to get a little bit of direct feedback of like, what do you think of this, right? Not like, would you buy this, but like, what do you think? And then they start to give you a little bit more familiarity. And then at the end of that conversation, I would usually say, you know, I really learned so much, and I think you have such an interesting perspective on personalization. Would it be okay as we build the demo if I run it by you in the future, in the next 2 to 3 weeks? And usually people say yes. And you can also gauge how excited they seem to be. And then the next conversation that you have, you're getting product feedback from them. And when you get product feedback from somebody, you're basically demoing them. If they're interested, you'll know it. And so a lot of those people actually entered a sales funnel with us. And so that, you know, you could totally just go that route instead of asking for sales conversations.
Yeah, I guess I have just like one like smaller question. Like when you very first like reach out to people, did you mention at all what you were working on, or you were just like, hey, I'm just here to learn about your business?
Well, a lot of my discovery conversations were people that I knew. So I just was like, hey, okay, I'm working on this. And as part of it, I'm trying to understand, you know, how ABM marketers make, you know, how you make decisions, how you select software, or, you know, what your day-to-day challenges are. So the focus was like, hey, I want to ask you a bunch of questions. I'm not trying to sell you anything, but if I felt like it was useful to say, I'm a founder, I'm working on something, you know, I would share that. Generally speaking, it's good to be a founder. It's not good to be a sales rep when you're reaching out cold, but people like talking to builders. So I think generally that's part of your credibility, and it's sweet, and you know, you're trying to build something for the world. And I think most people respond well to that. So I would probably mention it even if you didn't know them.
Awesome.
Other questions?
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, or I guess we have 5 minutes left if you wanted to go till 12:30.
Yeah, that's fine.
Do you have any suggestions around when you reach out to someone on LinkedIn for the first time to connect with them? Do you add a personal invite to it, or, you know, at what point do you, once you give them value with your follow-up? I'm just curious if you have any suggestions on the most effective way to get the initial connection, and, at what point do you make the ask after how to balance that?
When I usually send a connection requests. And we actually use a product called Primer. It's getprimer.com that automates the asking of LinkedIn connection. So I don't even do that personally anymore.
I like your style.
Yeah. And I usually have a very short blurb that says, why I'm connecting with them. And I could even say like, it'd be great to like have a conversation about blah, blah, blah. That's fine. You just have a very limited number of characters. So just make that compelling, because the main goal there is for them to accept, and then you can send them a longer message. So fit whatever you can, keeping in mind that you don't want to jeopardize them declining your invitation. And so if what you're asking them requires a lot of context and it's hard to understand, then just be like, hey, I see that you're an ABM marketer. I'm doing some research on ABM marketers right now, and I thought it'd be really great to connect with you.
Got it. Thank you.
And then when they accept, now you're free to email them you have their email, you can message them on LinkedIn, you don't have to send creepy emails. And so it's just easier.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I will try
Hi,
the next. Oh, sorry, go on.
Go ahead, Hassan.
Okay, so thanks. So we provide an API with a financial services, so it's banking as a service. So our ACV is normally more than 200 or even more. Let's say we charge quite some money on setup as well. So we're live. We have 520,000 cards issued in Europe. The problem we are facing right now is well, we automated, as you mentioned, a lot of LinkedIn. It was fully outbound. The question is more about as we now want to scale up. So we have 6 main customers. The contract is like 2.5 months. So would you drop the setup fee to increase scaling up for, let's say, demo day, or would you we charge up to 100,000 in setups? So
yeah, so that's a good question. Basically, progress is really important, and you should do whatever it takes to make as much progress as possible. You don't have to continue to do those things. So like, for example, I knew that I needed our price point to be around like $1,000, because I could make a really easy case that if they'll pay $1,000, they'll pay $3,000 once it's more advanced. But for our first set of customers, I was like, they wouldn't pay that, right? And so we just dropped the price to $100. So everything that you do, it can change from deal to deal, from week to week. You have no attachment. So I would just say try things to get to your demo day goal and your progress marker. The only time I would be careful is if if you're starting to eliminate something that's considered a major risk about your business. That's when it can hurt you a little bit, because you hit your goal, but then you almost like didn't have the right goal, because your goal wasn't aligned correctly with what people perceive to be very bad about your business. But generally speaking, you can drop setup costs, you can go do the setup for them. Just whatever gets things out of the way for you to be able to close an actual contract. For deals that take a really long time, this was always really challenging for people in our batch, if their deal cycles was really long. And so you would still have to find creative ways to shorten that cycle. A letter of intent, an LOI, is the absolute bottom that you should consider for what is considered traction. And so anything above that is better. So usage with a lower price is better. Paying you for a contract but not having a setup fee is better. An annual contract is better, but monthly is still better than zero, right? So so like now we do 30, 40K annual contracts, but when we were in YC, we immediately like waived that, and it was just month to month, so that we made the decision easier and we could show a higher MRR number at demo day. Because it's almost like it's like there's one thing people care about, and then nobody really cares like how you got to that. And so just kind of keep that in mind.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jaleh. We really
absolutely.
appreciate this
Great.
and everything you've given to YC. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Well, good luck, everybody.
That was really good. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great day,
What's
everyone.
a preferred method of contact for you? Is it email, Slack? What do you prefer, if any?
I would say probably email. Yeah.
Okay, I'd love to send you some popples just to give them to you and see what you think.
Sounds good. All right.
What email is the best? And I'll send you an email.
Just Jaleh at Mutiny HQ.
Have a great day. Thank you so much.
Okay. Bye.
Bye, guys. See you.